Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. It's good to have you. I'm excited to show you my first PvP build for Shadow of the Erdtree. It's an alpha, really. It's just a rough draft. And I figured, oh, there's a couple of strength arcane weapons. Let's give them a go. Oh, there's a cool twin axe that has a lightning spin. I want to use that too, so I figured let's do a hybrid strength build. The base game already has a lot of hybrid weapons. It seems that they want you to really prioritize one stat in the base game and then have a little bit in another stat so that you can wield the unique hybrid weapons. And Shadow of the Erdtree just turned that up to 11. It feels like there's hybrid weapons every place. It feels like every weapon wants you to have some faith or some intelligence or some arcane. Some weapons want you to have faith and intelligence, and it's all over the place. And so I thought I'd play with a few of these. It took me a little while to get to the content because I wanted to beat the DLC, and I wanted to also give it a little time so that this probably wouldn't be too much in the way of spoilers. There's probably a little bit. You'll see a weapon here or there. You might see an environment you're unfamiliar with, but hopefully it doesn't spoil the experience too much for you. If you are still trying to avoid spoilers at this point, when I'm recording this video, July 7th, heaven help you. I know I had things spoiled for me, and I was very careful about what sort of stuff I watched on the internet, and it still happened. You just can't go to anywhere that recommends content or has a feed, basically. YouTube was my downfall, just thumbnails of spoilers like a day or two after the release of the game, or the expansion rather. But overall, I've rather enjoyed Shadow of the Erdtree, and I've done the PvP a little bit as a phantom or as a host, which is a completely different ballgame. Of course, it's a lot easier to take on an invader when you outnumber them, and at least one of your number has their head screwed on tight. That's not too terribly difficult. I think we got bested by 2 invaders, and it was the same invader twice, actually, across our whole playthrough of going through the game essentially twice, because, you know, when you're playing through fresh content with someone, you both need to clear the dungeon, so you play the dungeon twice. You do an overworld section twice. You do each boss twice. Minimum. And so, though I've had a little PvP under my belt, and it was nice to, you know, play that way, that's not the best content. You're here to see the underdog, usually. You're here to see the invasion, so that's what we have for you today. So this Flower Dragon Bolt Mace, it doesn't hit very hard. I was hoping it would be like Honed Bolt for strength arcane builds, and it's not. It's a lot slower, its tracking isn't as sure, and the damage is middling. And I assume the damage is middling because this poor build only has like 19 arcane, and it's mostly strength. So I'm sure if I were to smack people with it, it would probably do just fine. Also, I don't know why that person died one hit to the other. It looked like a true combo. They must have forgotten to roll. Maybe they had a dropped input. Couldn't tell ya. But this spinning guillotine weapon on the putrescent cleaver, I think it's called. So this is a great axe, even though it doesn't look like much of one. Its Ashivore is interesting. It's kind of like a stance, a little bit. So when you hit the button, you do some weird spins that are kind of have a little bit of spacing between the hits. And then you can capitalize at the end of that spin with a faster spin by hitting R2 or your heavy attack button. And so you can kind of do the spin. Oh, do you see that Thorns move I just hopped over accidentally? Turns out that Thorn move is probably the strongest sorcery that people know about right now, at the time of this recording. It does average damage at normal ranges like you'd use a spell for, but for some reason if you're just shy of point blank, basically really close range, you hit people with all 3 trails of the thorns, and apparently the trails of the thorns also drop their own projectiles as they're heading outward, as far as the game's code is concerned, which means at point blank you're not hitting somebody with 3 strands, you're hitting them with like 3 times 7 or something. It's like an absurd amount of projectiles, and that's why it hits people so hard. I've been one-shot by it, so it's definitely something that you have to be aware of and respect thoroughly. It will mince you, and it seems like it's the current broken thing, and that's kind of the abiding philosophy of Shadow of the Erdtree. There's lots of weird and broken stuff, and the game's already had one patch, one little emergency patch since the DLC came out. They made it so that dueling shields yeah, dueling shields can't block everything for ages. They took significantly reduced stamina damage while shield poking, which was very cool for them. I wish they had somehow met it in the middle, but it's probably fair and balanced where it is, where you can only take a hit or two if you're smart. And then what else did they fix? Oh, perfumes with rolling sparks. So there's an Ash of War you can get for the new perfume type weapon, and the Ash of War was called Rolling Sparks. And it would shoot out like 4 or 5 clouds of explosive material depending on the flavor of your perfume. It could be lightning, it could be fire, it could be ice. And specifically on the ones that scaled with Faith, one of the fire ones and the only lightning one, you could get all of these to gather these clouds of explosions. You could aim it at the ground, you could aim it at a wall or a corner, and you would condense all these explosions, and it would just hit all at once. And I think it had some weird interaction where all of them would hit twice or something, effectively doing not only all of the clouds worth of damage, but doubling it. And people were hitting bosses for 25 to 40k, depending, which is an obscene amount of damage. Two-shotting endgame bosses is not really intended. You don't learn anything. It's a crutch. And people were trying to use it in PvP. I had a few experiences where somebody would melt my cooperator with it. And because I was aware of it, thankfully, it was a knowledge check, I could just give them a wide berth and poke at them and finish them off that way, because it is a crutch. It's not a full moveset, it is a gimmick. Speaking of gimmicks, two of the most cursed things in this new DLC are 2 Ashes of War for the backhand blades, Blind Spot and Swift Slash. Blind Spot's probably the first one you'll see on it, and it is essentially a quick step or a Bloodhound step with a follow-up hit at the end, which is scary in of itself because it means passive players can just input, read, or reaction punish everything you do just about. And you can't outplay it, you can't outrange it. It's not, you know, totally oppressive, but it does suck to play against somebody who's incredibly passive with it. The really cancerous one, in my opinion, is Swift Slash, because Swift Slash can be charged. It has very little startup. It hits in a line in front of them, and then has a follow-up wake of blades, kind of in a cloud around where the enemy where the player just used their Swift Slash. And it hits so hard, and when the Shadow of the Erdtree first came out, it had the same hit stun as like a colossal weapon. I think they've nerfed it now, so where it has similar hit stun to a dagger, I believe is the idea. But I think because it hits more than once still, it's a problem, nonetheless. And so Swift Slash is still horribly oppressive. The emergency patch did not fix it. And though I sound negative overall, I think I'm just trying to paint a picture for PvP as an invader is harder than it's ever been. I was really hoping that when the Shadow of the Erdtree came out, and I finally got around to doing the invading, that there'd be all these tourists here, they would be fresh meat, that a casual like me would be a bigger fish in the larger pond, for a little while at least. And it's not quite that way. The average player now has lots of tools, lots of laser beams, lots of anime dashes and slashes, and it's tough in a way. And of course, you know, that's the challenge. You are the invader, you are the bad red man, you are meant to lose. Oh, I love these pots. I haven't talked about them at all. I'll get to them in a moment though. But I love those pots. The new hefty pots are phenomenal. I love that you have a nuke option. I love that you can just throw it super far. I love that it has an AoE. I love the idea that any build can feasibly have a ranged AoE if you're willing to get the pots together. And that's wonderful. I love that utility. A lot of people don't like the cookbooks and the crafting system in Elden Ring, and I usually hate games that have survival crafting elements. I don't mind it in this game because it adds a lot of versatility to my action RPG. It's like, doesn't necessarily matter what my build is, I have options thanks to those. And of course, if you're running a physical build, you know, dexterity with keen or strength with heavy or quality, you have greases as well to slap on a good chunk of your weapons. And I just love that. I also like the Ancient Meteoric Greatsword. This thing is wonderful. I love it. I wish I'd used it a little more. I was trying to use the more balanced strength arcane weapons at the start of the video, and I wish I'd used the Meteoric Ancient Greatsword a little more. And the reason it's cool is it's a super long greatsword, or colossal greatsword. It has the lunge R2 from the Zweihander, and then its Ash of War is an initial charge that has super good range and a poke. And then if you get somebody like 2/3 on the blade, so not the tip, but like the 2/3 mark on the blade, it has a follow-up explosion, and it'll combo, and it's probably my favorite weapon. And yes, it is a little anime, but I can't help but forgive it because I think it's cool, and that is the objective metric by which I'm judging these things. But look at this interaction here, right? I've talked about the pots. These pots right here are the hefty rock pots. You stuff a bunch of rocks in them, and it has S scaling with strength. I don't think you two-hand these suckers because it's a consumable, so I'm sure that with my meager 54 strength, it's not getting in nearly as much punch as it could, say, if somebody had, well, more than that. Up to 80, I imagine, because it's S scaling. So I wonder how hard it hits when you have, like, 80 strength. Oh my goodness. I would love to find out. But it does physical damage, which is great. I assume it's strike, but I don't genuinely know that. It could just be standard. It's a rock. It makes sense it would be strike, but I don't know. And it just hits an area, you can throw it at range, and it just feels good to use. When I was first playing this game, way back when, first getting into the PvP, I was like, oh, it's neat that there's a small pot and a medium, or at the time, a large pot, the ritual pots, they're now the medium size. It's nice that every build can have some of those. They're nice as a little punish for people who are stuck in an animation. And I found that it wasn't terribly helpful on all builds. Wizards, you're better off using your mana for a spell. You know, strength builds, you get fire. Not so great because everybody has fire resistance. It comes free with your vigor stat. Faith builds could have holy, which was kind of middling, and fire as well, which I've just explained why that's not the best. Dex builds, however, had it made for them because they got lightning pots. And so now that strength builds get a physical damage pot, oh, I love it so much. Don't get me wrong, fire's cool, fire has a use. Everybody has fire resistance though, so fire damage as split damage when you're fighting other players always feels a little worse than it ought to. Unless your number, of course, is just obscenely high. But I really like how Shadow of the Erdtree, new thought here, how Shadow of the Erdtree is a true expansion pack. DLC feels like an insult a little bit. It is an expansion, like the good old days where you get an expansion for Warcraft 3 or StarCraft, you know. A true expansion that adds a considerable amount to the game and changes up the experience. It's like a soft sequel. I've heard some people refer to it jokingly as Elden Ring 2. And I'm rather enjoying it. I think it is a good investment. I think it's worth the money. And it's really funny hearing internet discourse of tourists. Again, it feels derogatory. I'm not meaning it. I'm trying to just describe a certain group of people who show up, have their fun, and then leave. They don't live here like I do. Like the deranged fans, the cult following, so to speak. How these people will show up and they'll get just really upset at the scaling and the difficulty. And don't get me wrong, there are parts that feel incredibly difficult when going through the main story and the areas of Shadow of the Erdtree. But I also think it goes back to Miyazaki and FromSoft's game design philosophy of they trust you, the player, to figure it out, to take all of these pieces of the RPG and configure them in different orders to get new results. Not necessarily to try the same thing over and over again until it works, but to really genuinely try for something new and to figure it out. And that's been their abiding philosophy, it feels like, at least since Demon's Souls, to my knowledge. You know, Demon's Souls, where they had a lot more gimmick fights, and so they want you to figure it out, and it feels like all these tourists, so to speak, who have enjoyed the other Souls games, who are likely fans of the franchise overall, you know, they learned a couple things, they were tested in their previous games, and they haven't learned much since, and they don't want to learn more now, because Elden Ring is a lot bigger than those older Souls games, and as a consequence, there's so many more knowledge checks. So many more knowledge checks. I was listening to a podcast a little while ago. I won't oust them, but one guy was talking about how he was running Rivers of Blood and the Hand of Melania, and he had 99 dex, and he was level 171, and even he was having difficulty, and he thought it was so stupid how he had to go get the Shadow Tree fragments, you know, and they were just lying around, and you didn't have to earn them. They weren't behind bosses. And it's like, well, first off, you're using weapons that don't solve every situation. 2, your stats sound like they're allocated poorly. And 3, Elden Ring has always rewarded the player for going and exploring first and picking fights second. Even with the base game, if you go and grab health items and health potency items first, you will do so much better at the game. And as somebody who's taught a half dozen people who are fresh to the Souls franchise how to play the game, it's true. You just need more time to make more mistakes. And so going and finding things first really helps out. And the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC is the same way. If you look around the world first, get a handful of Shadow Tree fragments and slap them on your character, you will do so much better. Well, that's the end of that rant, more or less. But hey, I'm glad to be back, and I'm just excited that there's been some more life breathed into Elden Ring as a whole, and it's just delightful. And let me say, I like this great katana. Its poise damage feels a little weird, but I still like it. I really like it. I don't like normal weeb stuff, not really. Doesn't interest me. But once the katana became big, a neuron activated somewhere, and suddenly I get it a little more now. I understand a little more now. And look at this poor invader. Oh man, we are having a duel and he gets hit by the janky hitbox of the Great Sword of Damnation. That's another thing that needs fixing. I should probably play with it before it goes, though. But thanks for joining me today. I hope you'll stay tuned for more content in the future. Bye-bye now.